Sorry about that. Trying to, get this bracket in my hands, perfectly, or at least substantially. Kind of read it while I'm, or look at it and read it and discuss, what's going on or what could happen while I'm doing this recording. But anyway, yes, as of yesterday, the 6th, I think it was the 6th of January, the playoffs pretty much are set. And I'm going to tell you, it was an interesting day for a lot of teams that you thought would try to make it or try to get a good seeding, but it wasn't. I mean, first of all, Jacksonville, it looked like they were on the verge of pretty much getting into the playoffs for quite some time, and then all of a sudden they just fell apart. And, yesterday it was like, well, they had one last opportunity, and Tennessee said, nope, not going to happen on our watch, and not going to happen, on our home field, and pretty much that was that. So Jacksonville went from being red hot to basically being, ice cold. We'll put it that way. So they were eliminated. And a lot of other teams possibly were hinging on certain outcomes, but unfortunately they could not get in. Either those teams being, New Orleans and Seattle, they were all, and Atlanta, I think, they were all hinging. On certain scenarios to play out. They just did not. They did not play out. I think Atlanta got eliminated anyway. So when they lost their games, but yeah, Seattle and New Orleans, they were hoping for things to play out differently. They did not. So as you can see on the screen, this is the bracket. Pretty much. And the way it plays out this year, and I think it played out similarly last year, but, the way it plays out this year is only two teams from each conference are given byes. So, of course, being the number one seeds. For the AFC, we have the Baltimore Ravens on number one, and for the NFC, we have the San Francisco 49ers, which, quite frankly, me and my family are happy about. Now, let's be honest, that doesn't mean that the number one seeds, and I'm saying this as a 49ers fan, that doesn't mean the number one seeds, are, going to be successful. Some people say that you have to credit, a lot of rest for possibly a downfall, if you will. A downfall, excuse me, am I just getting something out of my eye. My hand also hit the mic there, or touched the microphone screen. Anyway, it doesn't mean, or guarantee that team's going to succeed because, of course, they have a week off, if not 2 weeks. And basically they're given an opportunity to rest and everything, but then, of course, they have to, practice and get themselves ready and all that. But what they have to do to get themselves in, practice and ready for, what's to come is to also pay attention to the games, because the way it works is the number one seeds will face the lowest seeded team remaining. The lowest seeded team remaining. And what that means essentially right now is if you look at lower seed on the AFC side, lowest seed would be Cleveland, Miami, and Pittsburgh. Those would be the only ones. Now, that could all change. But those are the lowest seeded teams. They are. But you might say to yourself, well, what happens if 2, 3, and 4 win their respective matches? Well, then that means 4 would be the lowest remaining team, wouldn't it? But initially, the lowest seeded team right now for the AFC is Cleveland, Miami, and Pittsburgh. Now, how would this play out? Well, let's take a look at this. Okay? On the AFC side, let's say the number 2, 3, and 4 teams win. Let's say that happens. Well, number 4 is Houston Texans. That means Houston would go to Baltimore. And then if Kansas City wins and Buffalo wins, then that means Kansas City would go to Buffalo. There you go. Now, if that does not happen, and let's say Cleveland beats Houston, and let's say Miami beats Kansas City, and then let's say Pittsburgh beats Buffalo. This is how it plays out. Pittsburgh goes to Baltimore. Cleveland would host Miami. You heard that right. If Cleveland beats Houston, Miami beats Kansas City, and Pittsburgh beats Buffalo, then Pittsburgh goes to Baltimore, and Miami would host Cleveland would host Miami. That's how it basically would work. The number one team gets the lowest ranked team, and the second highest team would host a game. That's how it would work. So basically the most potential teams to host anything here would be Kansas City, Buffalo, and Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore in the divisional playoffs. They'd be the only ones to host something. They'd be the only ones to host something. So, that would be that's going to be interesting to look at, because let's say Kansas City beats Miami, and let's say Buffalo, like I said, Buffalo beats Pittsburgh. Kansas City goes to Buffalo. But Kansas City could still host a championship game, because let's say, the lowest seeded team, which is either going to be Houston, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Miami. Let's say one of them beats Baltimore, knocks them off, and Kansas City, gets to the championship. Kansas City would host the AFC Championship. Buffalo would host the AFC Championship. That's a fact. That's a fact. The highest ranking team would always host the game. That's pretty much it. So basically, the only team that would have to do a lot of traveling is going to be Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh would have to go to Buffalo, then they'd have to go to Baltimore, or whoever, they'd have to go to Baltimore, and then if they beat Baltimore, they'd have to go to either whoever the highest ranked team is. And that could be anybody. That could be anybody, because again, the lowest seeded team takes on Baltimore, and the second highest team would host the second lowest team, pretty much. So like I said, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are the ones that would either, depending on their situation or how things play out, would be, one of those teams would go to Baltimore. Like I said, if 2, 3, and 4 win their respective matchups, then number 4 would go to Baltimore, and Kansas City would go to Buffalo. Pretty much that's how it works. But again, things can change. Things can change. And like I said, Cleveland could be Houston, and Miami could be, Kansas City, and Buffalo could, still beat, Pittsburgh. And that would be interesting, because then Miami could go to Baltimore, and Cleveland would go to Buffalo. So there you go. So yeah, basically, whoever the lowest seeded team remaining pretty much is going to face Baltimore, and then the second lowest team would go to the second highest team remaining. And that could be anybody. That could be anybody, pretty much. Like I said, the ones that are more than likely would be Kansas City and Buffalo. They would be the most likely, if you will, to host a divisional round. Now, the NFC, pretty much the same way. San Francisco is the number 1 seeded. They would get the lowest seeded team. And that would be either Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Los Angeles Rams, or Green Bay Packers. I can tell you this, honestly, it doesn't make it easy for them, because again, as much as I love the 49ers, and I always will, the team, it's not guaranteed they'll make it, and the potential teams they could face, will give them a run for their money. There's no doubt about that. They will give them a run for their money. There's no doubt. Now, here's how it would play out. Again, if Green Bay basically, like Pittsburgh, is going to have the hardest road to the Super Bowl if they want to get there, because of the fact that they have to travel a lot. They got to go to Dallas, and then potentially got to go to San Francisco. More than likely they have to go to San Francisco, and so on. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much how it would play out. Now, again, any kind of scenario on the NFC side can work out. Any kind of scenario on the NFC side could work out. Again, 4, 5, 6, and 7, are the ones eligible to face the number 1 seed in Santa Clara. Now, if, like I said, if Green Bay beats them, Green Bay automatically goes to San Francisco. That's pretty much it. And then the second highest seeded team remaining would, host the second lowest team. In other words, for example, if Green Bay goes to San Francisco, and then let's say Detroit beats LA, Detroit would host either Tampa Bay or Philly. End of discussion there. Now, if Dallas beats Green Bay in everything, if they beat Green Bay, and then let's say LA beats, San Francisco, Philadelphia beats Tampa Bay, then one of those teams would go to San Francisco. One of those teams would go to San Francisco. Now, what does that mean? Well, if Tampa Bay wins, and Detroit wins, and Dallas wins, Detroit goes to Dallas, Tampa Bay goes to San Francisco. If Philly wins, and Detroit and Dallas win, then Philly goes to San Francisco. Pretty much that kind of a scenario. Now, you might say, well, wouldn't Detroit potentially host a divisional round? Yes, they could. They could. Because, basically, if, let's say Green Bay beats Dallas, and Detroit beats LA, and Philadelphia or Tampa Bay beat each other, then that person would go to Detroit. Pretty much, the road to the Super Bowl on both sides of the coin here go through various different cities potentially. Mostly right now, Baltimore and San Francisco are the path that, teams are going to have to go through. But that could all change. That could all change. But basically the fact of the matter is this. Long story short, highest ranked team gets the lowest seeded team in the divisional round, and the second highest ranked team gets the second lowest team in the divisional round as well. So in other words, Dallas will host Green Bay, and if they get past Green Bay, then they will get who is the second lowest. In other words, again, if Detroit loses to the Rams, then the Rams go to San Francisco. Dallas would either get Tampa Bay or Philly. Pretty much that's how it plays out. That's pretty much how it plays out. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be an interesting playoff. Probably the most competitive. I'll put it that way. And look, like I said, it's not guaranteed that Baltimore and San Francisco will make it. It's not. Because here's the thing, San Francisco knows what it's like to have to be in the wild card and get all the way to where they got to get to. There's no doubt. They've been there, done that. They've been there, done that. But they got to make sure that they don't get too, relaxed and too much on the lures. And that includes Baltimore. Both teams have to make sure, hey, let's not get too, let's not get too relaxed. Let's make sure we're all ready to go, and we're ready. We've studied, and look, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen on both the Baltimore and San Francisco side of things. They are going to study basically 4 different, film footages. They're going to study Tampa Bay. They're going to study Philadelphia. They're going to study the Rams because they just played them, and Green Bay, because those are the ones that are basically eligible to go over and face them in Santa Clara in the divisional round, because they are the lowest seeds. That's pretty much it. Same with Baltimore. Baltimore on the AFC side would face either, like I said, Houston, Cleveland, Miami, or Pittsburgh. And you can't tell me that they won't be studying footage of Houston, Cleveland, Miami, and Pittsburgh to get ready for that, because they will. But yeah, to make it simply put, right now, San Francisco would either get the 4, 5, 6, or 7 seeded team in Santa Clara, while the second ranked highest team outside of them, which would be basically Detroit or Dallas, would host the second lowest seed. Pretty much it. pretty much it. So again, if Tampa Bay goes to San Francisco, then Detroit would probably get Philly or Green Bay. Basically, if Tampa Bay goes to San Francisco, then Detroit would go to Dallas. Or if Dallas loses to Green Bay, then Detroit would host either Philadelphia or Tampa Bay. Basically, the road, when you look at it, goes through the number 1, mostly the number 1, and if not the number 1, the number 2, and if not the number 2, the number 3, and then out of all likely scenarios, maybe the number 4 or 5. Basically, the highest ranked team that remains, would be the one hosting the conference championship. Which means when you really think about it, on the AFC side of things, when you really think about it, on the AFC side of things, Miami could be hosting a conference championship against Pittsburgh, and the Rams could be hosting a conference championship against Green Bay, but we don't know. Just because that's possible doesn't mean it's going to happen. But again, crazier things have occurred. We've seen, historically, the Super Bowl have the lowest seeded team go in there and win. We've seen that. We have seen that. So there's no basically denying what could happen next. But again, I guarantee you that both Baltimore and San Francisco, during this week of rest and healing up and all that, are going to be studying tape, studying video of Tampa Bay, Philly, the LA Rams, and Green Bay for San Francisco, and Baltimore, would be studying film for Houston, Cleveland, Miami, and Pittsburgh. Because they know any one of them, being the lowest seed that remains, could potentially be the ones they face. But yeah, I think this is going to be the most competitive, NFL playoffs we've seen in a while, because again, basically either side does not have an easy path, even if they're number 1. I mean, if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan, that's true. That your team might be on a roll right now. They might have a lot of momentum, but damn well as anybody that just because they have that doesn't mean it's guaranteed to get them all the way to Las Vegas. And the same with my 49ers. I know the team can succeed. I believe they can succeed in everything. I mean, heck, I've been putting out my grandpa's helmet. His helmet he got when he was alive was kind of like a souvenir helmet, and his jacket he used to wear. I put that out every Sunday. Every time they play, and it seems to help out a little bit. Not all the time, but it seems to help out. So we'll have to see in the future. We'll have to see what happens in the future. But the point that I'm getting at is it's just that, just because they're number 1 and they got to bye doesn't mean they're going to succeed. It doesn't mean that. Now, people will look. Now, let's be honest about one thing, too. People will look at what happened to both, the 49ers and the Eagles yesterday, and they'll look at some other teams that made the playoffs and be like, man, why did they play so bad? What happened? Why did they play so bad? What happened? And quite honestly, it's because they didn't play the starters. If they would have played the starters, it may or may not have been a different story. We don't really know. But it's because they want to rest those starters up for the playoffs. And also, when it comes to Philly, they're a good team. They might be, let's be honest. If there's any team to keep an eye on both conference sides, it's the Eagles, and believe it or not, it's the Texans. Those are the ones to look out for, because because the Texans are gaining momentum right now. They have momentum in front of them. They're going to be hosting a playoff game. They have momentum. The Eagles, they may look like they're down and out right now, but we've seen this before. Teams will look like they're down and out because of the fact that either they have injuries or basically they don't want to play too many, starters because they want to keep them rested. We've seen this before too, where it looks like they're down and out, but come playoff time, it's all of a sudden like, man, where was this team the whole time? It's like you're wondering, what was this team the whole time during the playoffs? It surprises you. It shocks you, when you see that team that looked like they were down and out in no luck, but barely got in the playoffs, now all of a sudden resurging and saying, hey, we're back to dominance. it's one of those situations, but it's one of those situations that you just have to keep an eye out. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But yeah, basically, this is, like I said, it's going to be very competitive, and I can't wait to watch. As a 49er fan, I hope they go all the way. I do. But again, they don't. But again, the road that's in front of them is not. Hold on for a second. Sorry about that. That was my mom calling to check up on things. But anyway, like I said, it's going to be a very competitive playoff. There's no doubt. And like I said, as much as I want the 49ers to go all the way, and I hope they do, like I was saying before the phone rang there, it's not going to be easy for them. And the same can be said for Baltimore. It's not going to be easy for them too. There's teams here, I think they faced during the regular season, they're going to be like, okay, we got to change up our strategy against these guys if we want a chance to beat them. As much as anybody might say, oh, easy path, it's not. It's not. Because this is the one time a year, the playoffs, that's like, yeah, you think it's easy, but, screw you, it's not. We're going to make it harder for you. In other words, even if, San Francisco and Baltimore get there all the way, get all the way to Las Vegas, it's not going to be without dishing out, some bruising, hardcore fighting in competitiveness in these games. It's not going to be without sacrifice. We'll put it that way. But let me know what your thoughts are on the NFL playoff matchups, for the wild card and the bracket overall. Which team is your team that you hope goes all the way, or kind of basically tries to get as far as they can? And who are the ones to really look out for? Do you think it is going to be Philly and Houston to look out for? Or do you think there's other teams that are in play that you have to keep an eye on? Let me know down below in the comments, as well as in the live chat during the premiere. Like the video. And until next time, guys, talk to y'all later.